During my mother's funeral, the air became tense the moment my mother-in-law walked in. With an unsettling smile, she casually announced that my home would now belong to her son. As she wandered through the rooms, she even pondered aloud which one she might claim. "I wonder if this room would suit me," she mused, entirely disregarding the solemnity of the occasion. Taking a deep breath, I calmly informed her that I had inherited the house. Unbothered, she insisted that, since I was married to her son, everything I own belonged to him as well. "So, this house is technically my son's, right?" she said, her grin unwavering. Her lack of empathy stung, especially as she suggested, with a cheerful tone, that we should start getting along better, hinting that a move-in was inevitable. It was painfully obvious that she had no regard for the grief I was experiencing. How can she bring this up now? I thought, feeling my frustration grow. The house, filled with cherished memories of my parents, felt suddenly under siege. As I grappled with this intrusion, I reflected on my life. At 44, I had once thought marriage might not be in the cards for me after I turned 41, but fate had other plans, and I met Jack, my husband, who is 5 years younger than me. We connected through a mutual friend, and he always valued my opinions. Even when we debated honeymoon destinations, his preference was Europe, while mine was the Maldives. He embraced my choice without hesitation. Yet our marriage came with its own challenges, particularly his mother's involvement. Early on, Jack had mentioned his mother's hope to move in with us. Given his father's declining health, we had agreed before our wedding that living with either set of parents wouldn't be an option. Reminding him of this promise, he reassured me he would handle the matter. The confrontation with my mother-in-law only reinforced my resolve to protect my family home. Jack, seeing my distress, agreed to support me, understanding that this house was more than just property. It was a sanctuary, a testament to my parents' love and hard work. My father, a disciplined executive, had always made sure we lived comfortably despite his modest income. His legacy loomed large in my heart, especially since he had passed away 4 years before I got married. He never saw me walk down the aisle or met the person I trusted with my future. His absence left a void, but his influence remained, shaping my values and grounding my sense of responsibility. 3 years into my marriage, my mother passed away. During this painful time, Jack was my rock, constantly checking in. "Are you okay? Maybe you should rest," he would say, always attentive and caring. We held the funeral at our family home, a choice that felt intimate and personal. Amidst my grief, Jack's presence was a comfort. Yet when Ava, my mother-in-law, arrived, the atmosphere shifted. She extended her condolences, and though I was polite, her sudden cheeriness felt jarring. At first, she praised my organization, noting how smoothly everything went, but moments later, her true intentions emerged. "Now that the funeral is over, let's drop the formalities," she said, eyeing the house with unsettling enthusiasm. Her compliments on the home's beauty turned into a blatant claim. "My son will inherit this house," she declared, brushing off my apologies about any clutter with a dismissive wave. As she explored further, Ava nonchalantly suggested, "Maybe I'll take this room." I was stunned. Wasn't she aware of how wildly inappropriate this was? I reminded her, trying to stay calm, that I had inherited the house. "I know your parents had no other children," she said with a smirk, "but a wife's possessions are her husband's, aren't they? So this house is really my son's." Her words left me reeling. Even as I stood in disbelief, she had the audacity to suggest that we should become closer, hinting that she planned to move in soon. Alarmed, I asked, "Are you saying we'll be living together?" She nodded, unfazed. "Exactly, there's plenty of space here, and I won't have to care for my husband alone." At that moment, Jack stepped in. Having overheard, he gently but firmly addressed his mother. "Mom, this isn't the right time for such discussions," he said. She dismissed his concern, waving him off. "Why are you making a fuss?" Jack didn't let it slide. He insisted she leave and escorted her out, then returned to comfort me. "I'm so sorry. She's unreasonable sometimes," he said, his sincerity evident. I was grateful but wary, wondering if he truly understood the significance of my concerns. In the weeks following the funeral, I broached the topic of moving back into my family home. "Our apartment is getting cramped," I said. Jack agreed, especially with the prospect of starting a family. "You're right," he said, but then, he hesitated. "Since it's so spacious, I thought maybe my parents could move in, too." My heart sank. "You mean live together?" I asked, incredulous. His support wavered as he admitted, "Mom keeps insisting, Despite his earlier defense, he seemed increasingly swayed by her demands. You were so firm with her at the funeral, I reminded him. Do you really think living together is a good idea? His response was evasive. I just didn't want to make decisions hastily at the funeral, he said, his reluctance to take a. I stood my ground on my refusal to live with my in-laws, emphasizing the struggles I faced managing everything alone, especially with my husband's physical limitations. My mother-in-law accused me of heartlessness, but I reminded her of the practical reasons we'd discussed earlier. Though I sympathized with my father-in-law's declining health, the thought of taking on additional responsibilities, particularly under our current strained dynamics, felt overwhelming. I made it clear that any consideration of cohabitation would require significant changes in my husband and mother-in-law's behavior toward me, respecting my boundaries and needs. A few days later, my mother-in-law called me cold and unfeeling. That evening, I found my husband rearranging our cramped living room. Curious, I asked, "What's going on? Are we preparing to store some boxes for the move?" He replied, "No, I'm making space for 2 beds." My heart sank. "Are your parents coming to visit?" I asked, hoping for a temporary situation. He looked up and said, "No, they're moving in today." My stomach turned as I realized that despite my objections, he and his mother had pushed forward with their plans. How could this happen? I demanded. My frustration boiled over. He shrugged. "Their lease ended, so we decided it was best for them to move in here. It'll be tight with all of us, but we'll move to a bigger house soon, right? Just bear with it." Fighting back tears, I said, "That's not what I meant. Why are we even considering this after everything I've said? I don't want to live with someone who disrespected me and intruded on our family home during my mother's funeral." He sighed. "I'll talk to her, but we need to make this work. We'll all be living together now, so try to get along." I was livid. "Why do you always prioritize your mother's wishes?" He defensively replied, "It's not about prioritizing her. I try to balance both of your opinions." But I knew the truth. When it came to his mother, he was easily swayed, convincing himself that he was being impartial. His kindness, which I had once admired, now seemed like a facade, as his inability to stand up to his mother forced me into this miserable situation. When my in-laws arrived, the cramped space felt suffocating. My mother-in-law complained about everything, while I apologized for the tight quarters and reassured her that things would improve after the move. My father-in-law, Peter, seemed more subdued, but it was evident he followed her lead. Soon after, my mother-in-law asked me to run errands for her, adding to the list of expectations she brought with her. As the prospect of moving my in-laws into my parents' home became a reality, I felt the urgency to take control. My mother-in-law was delighted, looking forward to the new arrangements, but I had different plans. Quietly, I initiated the process of renouncing my inheritance, obtaining court approval to forfeit my rights to the property. 12 days later, I made my announcement. "This house holds so many memories for me, but I couldn't bear the thought of you living there, so I've let it go. It's better as a memory than as a place filled with conflict." My mother-in-law was enraged. "What madness is this? Even if you didn't want the house, you could have sold it. Why throw it away?" I stayed calm. "Selling it would only lead to more issues, and I'd still end up having to manage that money to your benefit. This way, it's clearer for everyone." She fumed. "We moved out of our apartment for this. What will you do now?" I stood firm. "I've opposed living together from the start. You pushed ahead without listening, so I made my choice." The shock on my husband and his parents' faces was palpable. My husband, Jack, finally reacted. "Are you serious about this?" His voice wavered. I took a deep breath. "Yes, I've also been thinking about divorce." "What do you think?" His mouth opened in disbelief, but before he could answer, his mother erupted. "Jack, divorce her immediately. She's gone mad." Her insistence was harsh but expected. I watched Jack closely, hoping he'd finally make a stand. He hesitated, mumbling, "Maybe it's for the best." Then, even now, he couldn't oppose his mother's wishes, always folding under pressure. Seeing his reluctance, my decision solidified. "Fine, divorce it is." My father-in-law tried to console Jack. "It's what your mother wants." Yet Jack's attempt to frame the divorce as a compromise for me was the final straw. Resolved and unwavering, I declared, "All right, let's proceed with the divorce." I planned to leave with only a few essentials. That night, I checked into a budget hotel, knowing I had urgent matters to handle. The following morning, I took a half day from work and returned to the courthouse to finalize the necessary paperwork. A few days later, my mother-in-law called, her voice brimming with anger. "What's going on? I heard the house is becoming yours. How did this happen?" It seemed she had discovered the situation through the estate division process. "Yes," I replied calmly, "the house is mine." She hurled accusations at me. "You must have forged documents and tricked us." Remaining composed, I answered, "Why would I risk submitting forged documents to the court? Everything is legitimate." "Then why is the house becoming yours when you said you would renounce the inheritance?" she demanded. I explained. After filing the renunciation application, I decided to withdraw it. Renouncing an inheritance is final once processed, but it takes about a month, during which the application can be retracted. The documents you saw were from the initial application phase. I led you to believe I had given up the house and used the possibility of divorce to gauge everyone's reactions and determine my next steps. Although I never expected my mother-in-law's attitude to change, I had held out hope that my husband might show reluctance about the divorce. If he had expressed a desire to work things out, I would have reconsidered and eventually explained the truth about the house. But things didn't go that way. "So, will the property division mean the house has to be split between you two?" she asked, clinging to the hope of salvaging something. "You'll have to sell it and split the proceeds, right?" I had prepared for this. "If the house were marital property, you'd be correct," I said, "but it's an inherited asset, which is exempt from division. Only certain types of assets, like shared investments, would be considered." She pressed further. "What about Jack? Isn't he entitled to money through property division?" "We've only been married a few years," I explained. "Our short marriage made it unlikely for any of my inherited property to be divided, solidifying my claim to the house." My mother-in-law called me selfish and heartless, but I stood firm. "This house is precious to me because it holds my parents' memories," I said. "I won't let people like you live here. If you have further complaints, speak to my lawyer." With that, the divorce moved swiftly, likely spurred on by my mother-in-law's insistence. Whatever her motivations, the end of my marriage brought a profound sense of relief. The stress of dealing with my in-laws lifted, and I felt like I had finally protected my father's house from being taken over. After I moved out, my former in-laws soon felt the impact of their cramped living situation. Even without me, the small space was too restrictive. My ex-mother-in-law tried finding a new place, but age made it difficult to pass rental screenings. Eventually, my ex-husband secured a small, single-family home for them, a downgrade from their former hopes but offering them privacy. The higher rent added to his responsibilities, marking the start of a tough journey. My former mother-in-law's dreams of moving into my father's large house had been replaced with the reality of a smaller, more challenging setup. It was undoubtedly a bitter outcome for her. Meanwhile, I began a new chapter in the house my parents had left me. It felt warm, as if they were still there, surrounding me with love and memories. This new beginning was a chance for healing and reflection, honoring their legacy in the peace of their cherished home.